Thanks, Booming. We'll pass it off to Jenny. Maybe you can get us started with the introductions on your end.
Happy to. Nice to meet everyone. Jenny Cordina. I'm a Tepper alum from 2002. I then went on to McKinsey, where I've been ever since in our Detroit location. I'm a leader within our marketing and sales and healthcare practices. I lead what we call our consumer healthcare domain, and I'm the marketing and sales people leader for North America. Other than that, I've got a couple kids, dogs, cat. Thanks.
Great. Aparna, we can kick it over to you and then close up with John.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Aparna Saravanan. I'm a Tepper 2018 alum, graduate. Since 2018, I've been working at Deloitte in their supply chain practice. I've mostly focused on technology, clients, and supply chain planning or enterprise business planning work. Prior to Tepper, I have actually previously worked at Deloitte in their technology consulting practice back in India. So been in consulting for a while now. Yeah, that's a little bit about me at work. I am based out of California, originally from Bangalore in India.
John Dishner here. So I graduated Tepper in '94 with Alex Partners out of Chicago, and work in the turnaround and restructuring group there, where I do a fair amount of advisory work on turnarounds, and also from time to time take interim positions. Fair amount of work in the retail and consumer discretionary space, but I've worked in all different types of industries. We tend to be maybe a little more industry agnostic in that practice area. Prior to Tepper, went to Northwestern undergrad here down the street in Evanston, and live in Wilmette, which is a suburb of Evanston, with my family, 2 kids, wife, and a dog. So we're out here.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to get into a couple of questions to start off the conversation, but again, for anyone who's just joined us, feel free to put your questions into the Q&A panel as they come up, and we'll get to them a little bit later in our discussion. So to kick off, I think we'll start with a softball for the three of you. One of the questions that I think a lot of people have as they're starting off is, why did you become interested in consulting? What really drove you towards this career path? So maybe Jenny, we can start with you again, and then jump around a little bit.
Yeah, happy to. And actually, I saw one of the questions, and they're kind of the same thing. So I was actually an aerospace engineer. You could probably tell by some of the stuff behind me, before I went to Tepper, and I had completely planned on staying in that field. And McKinsey actually reached out to me. They saw my resume and reached out. And I actually told them, no, I'm not really interested. And they called back and they're like, you sure? Maybe just learn a little bit. So I did. I talked to a couple of folks, and I'm like, this actually sounds pretty interesting. More, something I hadn't really considered. And they kind of raised the idea, oh, just do it for a few years, right? And if you don't like it, you can go back to industry. And that's actually kind of what sold me, to be honest. So I entered consulting with a 2-year plan, and here I am, close to 20 years later. So I guess it's one of those things where just the way consulting works and how all the upsides of it really, frankly, changed me. And as you heard from Antra, I now do healthcare, so complete 180 from anything I'd ever intended, and I don't regret any of it.
John or Aparna, yeah, feel free to jump in.
Oh yeah, so in my case, I do have an engineering background. So my undergrad focus was in telecommunications. Right out of undergrad, I got a job at Deloitte in their technology consulting practice. So I started off pretty heavy on coding and technical and analytical skills. And then when I was there, I started finding opportunities to slowly transition more and more to the functional side or the business side of things. And there was a point when I realized, okay, this is what I really want to do, but I want to get even more closer to, I would say, like process redesign, and more so on the business side versus actually figuring out more things on the platform or the technology that I want to use. So I decided to, coming into Tepper, I realized I wanted to be in consulting, but I wanted to try a different type of consulting. So that's just been a little bit of, my journey to get here. Having said that, I think my background, no matter which part of consulting you've been in, I think it's it's really good to have the transferable skill set, and you can do that from any job too. So that's something to quickly call out there, just based on a few questions that I read here.
Yeah, and I would say I found my way into consulting. I mean, not directly out of, I came to Carnegie Mellon in '94 directly out of undergrad. And so my undergrad at the time was maybe a little, well, at least compared to the Carnegie Mellon student body back then, it was probably more liberal arts. I studied economics and history undergrad. And when I got there, you obviously had, a lot of like, recovering engineer types or heavy math types. So I studied, pretty wide range of different topics at CMU, but I landed with Ernst & Young out of Carnegie Mellon in Chicago, actually in Cleveland initially, but doing in their financial advisory services group, so doing valuation work and stuff around that. And after a couple of years, went to work for a small Chicago, small relative to like the New York shops, but a small Chicago investment bank called Mesero. Doing corporate finance work, sell side M&A, a few offerings, but more smaller scale type stuff. And I think that so I got recruited out of there by a friend of mine from Ernst & Young. There were a number of E&Y people that migrated to at the time the firm was called J. Alex and Associates, but Alex Partners at the time doing turnaround work, and it sounded intriguing to me, and kind of actually helping to kind of affect change versus just working, transaction to transaction, and helping to really get in and work on transformations and on turnarounds and do that in a hands-on manner. I thought it sounded quite interesting. So in 98, I joined the firm, and kind of have been there since, and the years just kind of tend to roll by after a while. But that's kind of how I found my way there. I can't say that it was that there was like this master plan on a whiteboard or anything. I just, you kind of look into it, and it seemed like it was kind of interesting and a good group of people, and joined the firm. I think there were 80 people when I joined, and I think now we have probably worldwide close to 3,000. Still quite small compared probably to a Deloitte or a McKinsey, but it's grown well. So it's got a good culture there.
No, thank you all so much for sharing. Really great to hear all your different perspectives on coming into it. I think that's one of the things that's been interesting for me coming through as a first year and hearing the different stories from my classmates. I think everyone comes at it from a very different perspective. So interesting to hear that from all of you. One of the things I'm curious about, I think, so when I was in some of our applicants and admit seats this time a year ago, consulting was exciting to me, working for different companies in a bunch of different industries, but some of the actual work, the actual deliverables was something that was a little bit more hard to put my finger on. So rather than maybe explaining what a typical day might look like for you, would you guys be able to share maybe a little bit about what were you working on yesterday? Obviously, confidential, obviously keeping things confidential, but could you share a little bit about what you were working on yesterday? And maybe I think also, given that the three of you have different levels of experience in the industry, how has that maybe changed for you over the course of your career? I think that might be interesting for our panelists, for our attendees to hear. So I'll go back to the other end of the panel. John, maybe we could start with you and work our way back around.
So what I do yesterday, so I have a client right now that is it's an unsecured creditor committee of a bankrupt REIT, a mall REIT called CBL, and so they own malls around the country, and we're advising them on on the creditor committee. So work with my staff on helping them look at the feasibility of the business plan for the company, and help work with another partner to look at, we have people that look at valuation work, and so trying to figure out what we're going to communicate to that committee next week. So that was one of the work streams. I sit in, we have a daily call with our partners that look at retail projects, both healthy, where we're doing more operational improvement kind of work, and then stuff that may not be so healthy. So spend some time on that. A couple of leads that you're always kind of looking at. So some time spent there, and then you know, some networking activity where, you know, we you know, you know, look, in a more normalized non-COVID world, you would do stuff in person, right? Maybe, but we had a in the evening had an online poker tournament with one of the law firms we do a lot of work with, so Skadden Arps, and that was actually quite a bit of fun. They really had a group that came in and did it, and I think they did a very nice job putting it together. So that was a good time, and that would, you know, that was kind of the day in a nutshell. I'm sure there was more than that, but I think that's the things that stick out, you know. And, so.
No, thank you. Definitely very interesting to hear about that. And I think the retail industry is one with a lot of moving pieces right now. So fascinating to hear how that works, both on the retailer side and also the investment trusts as well. Aparna, maybe would you mind sharing a little bit about your day?
Yeah, for sure. So just some context or background. I'm working for a semiconductor company right now. That's my client, and I've worked pretty much again in the supply chain space. A lot of work that I do is in process redesign. So yesterday, you know, with the virtual landscape, I think I spent almost half of the day just you know, preparing or being in meetings, mostly with client leadership, to help explain, you know, where are the big gaps in the process, what are the big decisions that we need from them, and just getting alignment on next steps so that their teams can go and execute. And the rest, I think the rest of the day was split between me just getting heads down time to process all the things that we need to do for the project itself in terms of what's coming up next week, next month, and also working with my team to put together perspectives on, you know, again, just in terms of whatever deliverables we set out to accomplish. I wanted to make sure we put together perspectives, we start meeting, and we have a good action plan to go and tackle each of those. So mostly focused on, I guess, client meetings, putting together perspectives for client meetings, and making sure we're staying on track in terms of hitting everything we need to.
Great. Want me to round it out? Awesome. I'd say my day is probably kind of similar to what you've just heard, but in a different space. That's probably the major difference. I would say on the client side, I'm in healthcare, as I mentioned, and so one of my clients is a health insurer that serves vulnerable populations. And as part of that, we're trying to help people through the care journey by better engaging them and getting them to their primary care physician. And so we were actually reviewing the output of that yesterday with the senior team, and had a lot of impact through that. And so it's very exciting. So now we get to figure out how to take that to other similar situations and scale it. So that was one big thing yesterday. The second is I lead all of our consumer insights in healthcare. I publish it, particularly around COVID-19. And we'll be publishing our next set of materials later, either Friday or Monday. So I was finalizing that before it gets risk reviewed so that we can fully publish it. And then the third thing is I lead people. And so we were, one of my colleagues did a whole bunch of listening tours for various roles within the marketing and sales practice. And we were talking about the output of that, what we were hearing, so we could begin to design the next set of initiatives to address experience within our within marketing and sales. And then I had all 3 meals with my kids, which was awesome. And nice having them at home.
No, thank you so much for sharing, and definitely appreciate those perspectives. It sounds like there's a lot of variety there, and the types of things that you're working on for all 3 of you. So no, definitely appreciate you guys sharing that. One question that I think would be helpful for people to understand. You know, thinking back to your time at Carnegie Mellon, your time at Tepper. What sort of like resources did you take advantage of when you were a student, and you know, after you graduated, that helped you sort of guide you through your career journey? So Aparna, maybe we could start with you for this one.
Yeah, happy to share my experiences. So when I can take this in 2 parts. So with my time at Tepper, I really, relied heavily on the Accelerate Center. So getting communication coaching, getting, leadership coaching, making sure that I'm tuning up my soft skills. I also have a better style of communication and just making sure that I communicate what I really want to do in my career the right way before interviews. All of that was extremely helpful. When I was there, I think every alumni who came and spoke highlighted how important organizational behavior courses were. At that point, okay, I took their word for it and I started taking those classes. But now that I'm here about 2.5 years later, I mean, I can see how important those courses are, and I'm glad I did those. But essentially, as you grow in your career, you start realizing that change management or just getting people to start moving towards or transforming their business or doing anything that changes what they do from today requires a lot of support and help. So those courses, I'm grateful I took those classes when I was there. And aside from that, the student community, that's the best part, to be honest, is just having a really good set of friends that you can rely on for good feedback, helping each other in a collaborative way, building out, anything it could be, for example, like star stories or just prepping for resumes and interviews, etc. I would say a lot of that was just through my friends and of course the Career Center as well. Post Tepper, this is interesting because the Tepper alumni community at Deloitte is pretty strong too. And I should honestly say the projects that I'm on right now is solely due to my Tepper alumni network at Deloitte, because I was able to speak to a couple of friends when I was switching between projects. I was able to find the right types of projects. So I have to say that's been a great benefit for me even at work.
Great, thank you. Jenny or John, whichever one of you would like to chime in, feel free, and if not, no worries.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'd recommend people do, and I did it, some back then. I think whatever industry or company you end up kind of being interested in. I mean, and there's usually a network of alums there, and I would say to try to reach out and do some of that networking outside of just the formal interview process. And I think people are usually fairly receptive to that. I mean, I know I try to be. I mean, sometimes you miss emails, or there's different ways. Sometimes there's better emails, better ways. Like email might be better than LinkedIn or whatever. But I would say trying to find people to network with at different levels. I mean, you don't necessarily have to go right to the vice chairman of a firm or something. You could find, but I think regardless of what level you find people to talk to, I think it can help to see if it's the right fit and what opportunities they have. And so I think that's a worthwhile thing that the school offers. And I think in general, I think I've found that Tepper people tend to be, it's a fairly, the group relates to each other fairly well, and it's a small enough group. People will talk to each other. It's not like it's thousands of I mean, probably is thousands of alums, but it's, I mean, relative to some other business schools, it's got a so that's something I'd recommend. I would echo one of the things Aparna said about I think any courses along the softer skills of management are really kind of key, and I think Tepper has done very, very well on this in the last 20 or 30 years. But I mean, I think the school used to be great at cranking out people that could think analytically and models and stuff like that, and that's wonderful. But that is only a part of a consulting skill set. And so I think the communication skills and presentations and other stuff like that are probably really really worthwhile and to take advantage of. And I think they probably have. I mean, they had some of that back when I was there in '94. They had an excellent a couple of excellent communication classes and stuff along those lines. But I would say to take advantage of any of that stuff that you can, to kind of think get outside of the box of just analytical thinking. And I think especially if you're coming in as someone who already as, if you've studied engineering undergrad and then you're doing a quantitative MBA, I think there is maybe a little danger there of getting too, having one side of the brain work too much.
I'll just add 2 things because I really liked what Sean and Aparna said. One was, I was actually part of, back then it was called the Flex Time program, which was I was working full time and then taking classes remotely, which is kind of ironic given what folks are doing now, taking classes remotely. And so I fully appreciate that, and Carnegie Mellon did it so amazingly well nearly 20 years ago. And then what was funny is they had us come in to do a few of the classes that it didn't make sense to do remotely. One of those, building on this point, was acting for managers. I don't know if they still have that. But it is to this day, probably class I remember most, because to John's point as an engineer, and all of us were engineers in our Flex Time program, a whole bunch of introverts that definitely do not act. And so it was the most awkward class, but it helped me really appreciate how, when you are a consultant, right, and you're speaking in front of people, when you are trying to engage people in ways that maybe aren't natural, being able to do that and think in a different way really, truly is important. And it's funny because a lot of people don't necessarily know how introverted I really am, because every day you go to work, you actually have to interact and engage and behave in ways that are maybe less than natural for some of us. And so to that point, I highly recommend courses like that, just that push you outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, by the way, too. I think you can definitely succeed. One of our CEOs from a couple years ago will tell you readily that he is, as I think a lot of people maybe from CMU might be as well, myself probably included, are probably have a natural introvert bias, but being able to get comfortable over time with kind of, all that really means is you're more comfortable recharging alone than you are charging. Extroverts tend to want to recharge around more people. But I think kind of learning some of those skills, there are definitely a lot of very successful introverts in consulting, but they've gotten comfortable going out and selling work and speaking to boards and speaking to CEOs and other stuff. They just might be very ready at 9 p.m. to leave the restaurant and go home versus heading to 5 more bars or whatever. So but I definitely those are things to think about, those personality fits and stuff like that. But to be successful ultimately in consulting, down the road, at some point, and our firms, our firm, I think McKinsey is probably the same way. We have definitely have room for people that want to just kind of do stuff and do it very well and not sell work. But if you look at a career track, a partner track, or managing director track, whatever you want to call it, generally, at some point in consulting, there is an expectation that you'll be helping to sell work or source leads or do whatever, and that it usually means that you're somewhat comfortable getting out and presenting to people to some degree.
Thank you guys for sharing the resources that you're able to take advantage of at Tepper. It's amazing to hear, your stories and your advice. But kind of putting yourself back in when you were at Tepper, just a quick question. You're graduating, you're about to go to, your firms of choice. Were you industry specific, meaning were you looking for a specific industry, or were you more open and just, hey, whatever industry comes in, I'm okay with that? And then going along those lines, from graduation till now, are you in that same industry or have you transitioned? How was that? Just a quick story about that. We can just start with anybody who's interested.
I'm happy to jump in. As I mentioned, I came in and I wanted at McKinsey to actually do aerospace work, and I ended up just getting staffed on a completely different study. It was more retail oriented. I ended up doing close to 2 years retail type work, and then I ended up on a healthcare study by happenstance, and saw how it was not consumer focused at all. And so I ended up falling in love with that and literally been doing that ever since. So from aerospace to retail to healthcare consumerism, and I found a true passion. It's one of those things where I did come in expecting one thing and it went a completely different way, but I'm really grateful for that. And sometimes life takes turns you can't predict, but it can turn out really amazing.
I have to call out that is one of the nicest parts of consulting, because you do get that opportunity to try out different things. I think that was, sorry, I don't think I'm answering your question exactly, Bhumi, but that was one of my biggest draws to consulting, is having the opportunity to try out different industries, different types of work. And at least from my perspective, I got onto a tech project, coming in after graduation. I then jumped onto a airlines project, and then due to COVID, there were a lot of issues with airlines and other hospitality industry sectors, and then I switched back to tech. So part of the nice part of consulting is, I think at most firms, and almost at any of the firms, you can choose to try out different industries at any point of time. So even if you start in one place, you always have that opportunity to try out something else, which is the nicest part.
Yeah, I would. I'm probably the least industry, just because of the nature of the three of us here. I'm guessing I'm the least industry focused career-wise. But so I would say I would kind of look at it like in consulting. You over time, you as an individual, you develop kind of a platform, and that platform might have a couple different. You might have an industry aspect to it. You might have a functional. So, ever since I joined the firm, I've been in turnaround and restructuring. So that's obviously like a functional thing, and that crossed a lot of industries. So in my time there, I've worked in mining equipment and environmental services and consumer products and retail and nuclear energy and any number of other areas and real estate. But I do think, and I with some of the partners that I work with that have kind of mentored me, in more recent years, they've kind of said, it does help, in addition to just having that. I see a cat walking behind Jenny, by the way. That's a little animal there, but so it does help to also have an industry, focus. And so for me, I kind of gravitated towards retail and consumer products. I mean, part of it, I think someone hit the nail on the head earlier. I mean, retail, and there's just no shortage of, as far as I can think, there's probably going to continue to be a lot of problems in that space for, until I'm ready to retire anyways. So that was a natural fit. And plus, to me, they're also industries that are easy to understand. But I also sit on calls. I've done a lot of stuff with really screwed up, heavy projects. So think Westinghouse when they had their nuclear reactors and that they were building and stuff like that. So I do sit in on some calls for heavy construction stuff. So someone was saying that one of the nice things about consulting is you can get exposure to a lot of that different stuff. But I would think about that for anyone entering into consulting, and I don't think you need to figure it out day one. And if you get with any of the firms that on this call or similar firms like them, they have enough resources and tools where you can figure that out as you go along. But having some functional stuff to say, oh, I can go do supply chain, or I can do IT, or I can do more what I do is more financial oriented. And then to have another vector that might be an industry or two. And then I guess I do a third thing, which I'll actually do interim officer work too, which is, but there's probably not a ton of firms that do that there, but that's another avenue you can look at. I think that just helps to give you a little more staying power and helps you ride out, cycles of things too. So.
I can add just one thing. I don't know if this is the same across consulting firms, but when I joined McKinsey, it was pretty much you were a consultant or not a consultant. And now there are so many different consulting paths. There's what we call an integrative consulting path. There is a expert consulting path that goes up to partner. It's an expert partner. Then we have our expert path, which goes through senior expert, master expert, and then we have our solutions leaders that lead various solutions. We then have within that people that are very specific, like data scientists, data engineers, actuaries, and so forth. And the diversity of consultants now is just so great too. And so I think even, you know, in the past, it was this notion that there was only one type of consultant. I think even as we're having this dialogue, it's kind of making me realize, you know, it's just so much broader today than it was then. And I think there's two great things about that. One is it's just so much more accepting of people with different profiles to come in against those different things that they're really passionate about and can really drive impact through. And the second is it allows us to serve as consultants our clients in a totally different way than we could when I joined McKinsey. You know, now we can actually bring the best people on that particular topic, right, when you need them. And then they can go and do that for the next thing. And, you know, you're not training on a client, right? You're not learning there, right? Because you're actually bringing the expertise, you're bringing the knowledge. And so you can have impact more quickly, you can have more impact. And to that point about being cross-industry, you know, like for me, we bring people that do marketing and sales work across industries to do healthcare work because a lot of that knowledge is very applicable. And frankly, in many cases, healthcare is not as forward-thinking as other industries. And so we can learn from that. In other places, we actually are pretty forward-thinking when it comes to things like risk management and things like that. And so it's this wonderful ability to bring knowledge of different types and different people together that I think is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, and obviously your firm has probably a deeper array of that stuff, but I think that's right. And you can look and see all those different types of specialties and get into, and what's interesting too is when you sit on these calls as a partner or even a senior director, whatever the different titles are in different firms, but when you sit in these different meetings, you can tell if they really want, I think in these different firms, they do want people that have a passion for the different areas. I mean, I guess ultimately you need people to work, they'll assign people to things, but they really do look for, like, okay, if you're in retail, who really has a passion for footwear or apparel or grocery stores, or then within that, okay, like here's someone who really loves digital and groceries and they've done 3 or 4 of them or something, so I do think, with the right firms, and there's a lot of firms that have the capabilities out there, but I think with the right firms, you definitely have an opportunity to explore that stuff and figure out where you want to fit.
I think those are some great points, and really appreciate you guys sharing that with us. I think one of the questions we had come through the Q&A was about, I have this background. Is that going to be okay for me in consulting? Is it going to be possible for me? And I think you guys, just summed up really nicely how I think consulting is a career path where you can come from just about any background and really be able to find something that you're passionate about and interested in, and then really find a place for yourself there. So thank you guys for all that. So we're going to get to one more of our questions, then we're going to get into all of your questions from the Q&A. So this one's a little bit softer, but I think something that might be good for everyone as they're sort of about to embark on their MBA journeys. So I'm curious for the three of you, what sort of advice would you give to your younger self, kind of at this when you were at this stage of your career, kind of going back to school or sort of getting ready to get started with a second portion of your education? So maybe Aparna, we could start with you for some of that wisdom.
Okay. So for me, I think maybe it's a two-part, I guess, just what I would tell myself in the two-part experience. So one is, it's okay to not figure out everything at this point. It's okay to not know, perfectly, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do, because, to Jenny and John's point, you may have plans, but it might go in another direction, and that's okay too. So one, it's totally fine to be, have a plan. That's important, but it's okay that you don't figure out every single detail there. And I think the second thing is maybe this is probably a more personal advice for myself, is to not overcommit, because I was pretty enthusiastic. I took on a lot more than I thought than I should have, and it's something that I learned along the way. So I'm very grateful for the experiences that I had, but these are pretty important lessons that I learned along the way.
Jenny or John, anything to add there? Otherwise, we can start to get into the Q&A.
My really quick one was, I really wish I'd believed in myself more, to be honest. I think I had so much self-doubt, didn't think I could accomplish as much as I've been able to. And it took many, many years to develop that confidence. And I wish I'd had it earlier. Would have saved a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think the experiences that we have make us who we are. But looking back, we're like, oh, there's so many things that I could have done differently. But I'm really glad with just all the experiences that each of us, I guess, have had in general.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to that, or what I kind of said earlier. I'm just focusing on the communication skills and the and the networking aspect of it. And I think I certainly was a person that I still do. I mean, I love to kind of go do the work. I find that interesting, but that whole softer skill side of stuff, I think is pretty critical. Maybe not taught in business school enough, and maybe a focus on that.
No, thank you all so much for that. I think that's definitely a big thing coming into the MBA is, believing in yourself and finding what parts of yourself that you want to develop and putting that forward. So no, definitely appreciate that advice for our attendees. So now we're going to get into your questions that you've all been submitting in the Q&A. The first one that we're going to address here is a little bit about the consulting lifestyle, work-life balance and how you manage it. Jenny, I know we very briefly had an additional panelist join us there, and you mentioned being able to eat with your kids. So maybe you could kick us off there and talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question, I think, for anybody thinking about getting into consulting to consider. My kids are both teenagers now, and what I'd say is, and I'm married, and yeah, I have pets, and yeah. So I think to your point, like having my career is incredibly important to me. The type of impact I'm able to have is I find a lot of meaning in that. But I also find meaning in my home life, and I do think that people can find whatever balance they're trying to seek within reason. It would be very insincere to say that you don't work a lot as a consultant. I think all consultants work a lot. That being said, I'm not sure we work more than other senior executives. They're working a lot, and if they're more distributed, they're also flying a lot. Now we probably fly more, but I do think just the nature of being a senior leader results in taking on a lot. So I'd say that. That being said, it's tied to a little bit the last question. What do you wish you'd know? You can also create your own lifestyle within, at least McKinsey anyway. So for example, I spent several years part-time at 70%, 80%, 90%, depending upon what I needed with my family at the time. When I adopted my daughter, I actually went on a very extended 50% time frame, actually through my designation to associate partner. I've done all sorts of things like that, and the flexibility to adjust my career, go faster, slower, has been really important. And I think actually in some ways you have more flexibility than a typical career trajectory, because you can kind of speed up or slow down a little bit more easily. If you want to be home with your family, definitely cultivate local clients. That is the single best way to have a sustainable lifestyle, I think. Undervalued a lot of the time. And like for me, I have some simple rules. I only will have core clients that I can fly to during a day trip so that I can get there and back. I'll play it more knowledge-based role with other clients where it might be, on the West Coast or too far, but I really try to keep it, within reason. Serve clients you like, then you're going to be happy. And prioritize, right? Learn to say no. I think that's a big thing. Like actually, my daughter's competing in the Michigan gymnastics championship tomorrow, and I'm going to go be with her, right? And watch her. And just know when you have to do those things and really prioritize it. Now, you're not going to do everything, but you can prioritize the things that really matter. So I think learning how to balance that, but I would say it's absolutely doable. I'd like to consider myself a good mom, and I'm pleased with my relationships. And so I think it's very doable, is my point.
I guess I would say I think it's a mixed bag. There's positives and negatives on it. I think in our group, in our firm, the travel has been historically more extensive maybe than some other types of practices. So if you get a bankrupt client in wherever, and pick up Florida or Georgia or somewhere, I mean, you have to be down there, because generally these situations that there just is a lot that can go sideways with them. I do think, and I'd be curious to ask the other panelists this from McKinsey and Deloitte. I do think that we've been pretty successful the last year running everything remotely and from Zoom. It hasn't been optimal, but we've done it, and the firm actually grew last year. And I personally think that that's going to lead to a change in the mentality of how you deal with that travel. I think you're still going to require it, but I think that like out Monday, back Thursday night or Friday type of thing, I think is going to be rethought. At least I think our firm is rethinking it. So that is something to consider, is the travel part of it. And I do think different clients require different amounts of it. If you've got a client that's in a crisis, you're going to have to be there more than if you've stabilized it and you've got the client that's been kind of doing pretty well. And there's other types of consulting where you probably can deal with it in more with less travel. There are other positives, I think, is I do find historically I've generally been able to compartmentalize my work pretty well. So that's a positive. And I do think that with consulting, you can. And we have people that live everywhere from in the U.S. from Miami to Seattle. I mean, and probably further beyond that. I mean, so I definitely think that can be a positive for people as well. I mean, I've chosen to live in Chicago, and my kids are pretty active. They're in the schools here and whatever. But we've got people that live kind of all over the place, and certainly, do your networking, you got to kind of get back to a city that has whatever you're networking with, but you can do that with day trips or weekends or whatever. So.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I think for us, our firm sent out a survey to just get a pulse check on if people want to start traveling the same way, or is it going to be different. I think it's pretty evident that everyone's comfortable working from home, and it's not going to go back to the same kind of travel. What it's going to go back to, I don't know what the new normal is. However, we know it's not going to be exactly the same as before. And I fully, echo Jenny and John's points in that you must prioritize and compartmentalize and draw boundaries for yourself, because that's the most important thing, to draw your own work-life balance, which could look very different for each of you on the call. But you should voice out and ensure you get that boundaries set up front, so you're able to really take time off and de-stress and decompress before going back to the work week.
No, thank you all for sharing. I think so some really interesting points there on how to find that balance. And I think as someone who's coming into the industry, definitely very interested to see kind of what it looks like, especially with that change from like the Monday through Thursday and back Friday. So very interested to see what happens there. Another question that came through here was specific for you, Jenny. What kind of nuances do you see with management consulting that are specific to healthcare or pharma?
I think the biggest one is that at the end of the day, it's truly impacting people's lives in a very meaningful and personal way. So for example, for our healthcare practice, we've always had a two-part mission. One is McKinsey's mission, and the second is to improve healthcare. So before every healthcare engagement, we start by asking, how does this improve healthcare? And that's really critical to us because at the end of the day, the work that we're doing has to improve healthcare. And so I would say, kind of like the example I gave of what I did yesterday, I think we take quite seriously that, you know, the work you're doing really truly affects people's lives. And I do think that's probably the single biggest difference. But it's also what gives it such meaning, frankly. So it's, I think, what a lot of us that do healthcare work are truly passionate about.
Great. No, thanks so much for sharing that. Another one for you guys, I think, more focused on the recruiting path for people, you know, coming in and recruiting for internships in the summer of, I guess it's going to be the summer of 2021 or 2022. What do you sort of recommend for incoming students that they might be able to do to prepare, whether that's, you know, networking, what sort of research can they be doing? What can they do to, you know, best prepare themselves for the fall? I know I have some personal recommendations, but definitely want to hear from, and I'm sure Boomi has his thoughts as well, but curious to hear from the three of you as well.
I can start. I think the single most important thing is spend time to introspect and figure out like what's truly important to you. Because as you think about these networking calls, what's important is also for you to assess fit with each of these companies. Make sure that that's what you really want. Is that company's culture gonna, you know, energize you and make you happy to go work there? So the first thing is just introspecting and figuring out what's really important to you in your career, in your life. And then using those networking calls to not only understand all the cool things that the company does, but also figure out if that's the right fit for you. I would also say it's important to first reach out to those who are already in the program. So first year, second years, you know, if you look at the website and find student ambassadors, please start reaching out to them because they've been pretty close to the process right now, and they would be best able to advise how to go about networking calls. And I'm sure you're going to get a wealth of knowledge and information from there. So yeah, my recommendations definitely start from current students. And of course, you are always welcome to reach out to alumni and different companies from TEPA.
Maybe not a great answer, but I'd say have fun with it. I think people that go into the interview and they're excited to share their stories, they have fun with the case, frankly, right? Don't view it as a test, view it as I'm trying to solve a problem with you, right? That's what we're trying to do. This is what you're gonna do every day. So you're gonna solve problems. And I imagine John and Aparna would say the same thing. Every time you interview someone, you want it to go good, right? You want this to be someone you're gonna work with. And know that, right? Because we're looking for fantastic colleagues to bring in and we want it to go well, right? And so view your interviewers as from that light, right? That they're excited and they want to work with you because that's the truth. And that will hopefully make all the stress go down a lot as you know, because you're not at your best when you're stressed out, right? And you want to be at your best. So have fun with it. And that's honestly my best advice.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to those. I think that was good advice from you know, I think the well spoken.
No, I absolutely agree with you there, John, and couldn't echo Aparna more. I think definitely spend some time to think about what really motivates you. What are you excited about personally? I also think this is a time to start thinking about what are those key moments over the course of the last couple of years that you think have been most meaningful for you in your career? Because those are the stories that you're going to be sharing with the Johns, Jennys, and Aparnas of the world before too long. So start thinking about those things while they're really fresh in your mind, because I think that can help ease some of the stress of the recruiting process and make you, I think, more effectively share who you are when you're sitting down at that table. So, and I also definitely agree. People like myself and Boomi are definitely great resources for you, and the consulting club and the entire TEPA community are really here for you when you join as that initial sounding board to start to learn. And then as you start to learn more, that's when you can begin reaching out to alumni and hearing their perspectives from people who are actually in the roles full time. But definitely always feel free to reach out to us, and we're always happy to answer those questions. So another question that came through was about how geographically flexible management consulting is. And I think that the question is, specific around, like, if you're interested in being in a certain region in the country, is that something that's workable, or how really, I guess, geographically dependent are recruiting and staffing and various things like that. So I'll throw that one out to the group, and then we might be able to close off with one more question before we end this off for the night.
I can start. I think that's slightly dependent on the firm as well. So I don't know if Jenny and John, you have a different opinion, but I think it's slightly dependent on the firm. I also think it's important for you to actually figure out where you want to be. It could be personal reasons, other professional reasons. Definitely pick what you want, because every company works differently. It's hard to really say, okay, if everyone's picking here, would I get here or not? Don't think of it, or don't game it that way. Think about what's important to you. I would say at certain companies, like for example, the office that I was initially aligned to was New York, but due to personal reasons, I had to transfer to Los Angeles. So all of these things are definitely possible. Almost a lot of firms that I've heard of are really flexible. They support your personal needs. So all in all, to say, pick something that's important to you personally or professionally. And yeah, that's not a really solid answer, but Jenny and John, do you have a different opinion?
Well, I think that within our firm, it even varies somewhat, but I think in the restructuring practice, we try to encourage, I don't know necessarily require or not, but we try to encourage people to be probably either in New York or Chicago or Dallas when they're starting out, just because we've got a lot of other people there that do that kind of work, and then there's opportunities for them to network and develop, But then that being said, we've got people who've been around the firm for a while that might live in wherever that we don't have an office, Boulder or somewhere, or, Austin, Texas, or, somewhere, wherever they kind of just prefer. So but then I think you have to just be mindful that if you're in that kind of area, if you want to, once again, it goes back to, if you want to be viewed as someone who's selling a fair amount of work, you probably then have to figure out how to get in front of people that might be in other cities, like New York, for instance. Or maybe you're just on a track, and like I said, we don't require, we're not up or out, we're kind of performer out. And so maybe some of those people go on a different track. The enterprise improvement group, I think, is more flexible. They tend to not be as anchored to, frankly, the restructuring world in the U.S. revolves around New York. That's probably where 90% of our referrals come from, but the other EI, the enterprise improvement guys, or people, I should say, that they're much more distributed. That their leads come from all over the place. So.
Mackenzie, Aparna, to your point, I think everybody's a little bit different. I think sounds like we might be a little more similar to you. Mackenzie operates at the North American level from a staffing standpoint. So it really doesn't matter which office you go to at all. My teams are composed of colleagues from all over the US, and oftentimes colleagues in other countries for specific skills. So it really doesn't matter.
Gotcha. No, thank you all so much for sharing. I think we're coming right up on 9:30, so I don't think we have time for any more questions. But just wanted to thank our panelists again for joining us here tonight and taking some time out of your schedules on a busy Thursday to come speak with us and speak with all the attendees on the phone right now and everyone who's watching this recording. So thank you so much for your time and really appreciate you joining us today.